Sometimes you get a great game, comes out, everybody wants more comes, and oof, it's no good. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 more game sequels that sucked. This is our second list on this. If you're interested, the first one we did had the following games on it: Force Unleashed 2, Driver 3, Medal of Honor Warfighter, Need for Speed Payback, Postal 3, Bomberman Act 0, GoldenEye Rogue Agent, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, Dynasty Warriors 9, oof, and an even bigger oof, Tony Hawk 5. Number 1 and number 2 really take the cake on that list. But 10's just not enough. There's so many sequels like this. So let's get rolling with this one. Starting off at number 10, Sacred 3. Released back in 2014, Sacred 3 was a game that took basically everything good from the previous Sacred games: RPG elements, loot, customization, an interesting world to explore, and cut all of it. All that's left is some multiplayer options and, wow, some really just lame jokes.
Sister Telari, oldest of the Seraphim, but don't tell her I said that.
To say this game has almost nothing to do with the Sacred franchise, I mean, that's an understatement. Aside from a few passing references and at least one familiar class from the previous game, pretty much nothing else going on is like the previous game at all, even a little. It's really confusing, but the reason's actually pretty simple. The original creators of the Sacred series, Ascaron, they had nothing to do with the game. Instead of being an epic open-world action RPG that in many ways was very ahead of its time, like Sacred 2, Sacred 3 is just a bland beat-em-up that can barely even get that right. Arguably, it doesn't. In comparison to pretty much everything else on this list, this one's a little obscure, but if you're a fan of the first two Sacred games, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. The third game, it just doesn't retain anything from the first two games that made them good, and if you didn't know that different people made it, you would be bewildered by it. And number 9 is Command & Conquer 4, Tiberian Twilight. Man, this one still stings, guys. Like, Command & Conquer, those are right up some of the best PC games of their era. They were fast, they're fun, their soundtracks were incredible. Red Alert was my jam, so you got all the Tim Curry silliness too. Oh, that's gonna send me down a rabbit hole when I'm done doing this. Unfortunately, as the years went by, the popularity of the RTS started to wane a bit, and it was basically just like StarCraft that was left standing. And in a desperate move to keep the series relevant, EA decided to radically rework the CNC formula, and this Frankenstein's monster of a game was born. It's a mess, pure and simple. That's what it is. It's like almost any semblance of strategy and tactics are out the window. They replaced all that stuff with these really confusing progression systems, really weird single-player content, and a just terrible conclusion to the Command & Conquer story. I actually went back and played this one a few years back and assumed that, oh, this can't be as bad as I remember it or as people say. It just seems like it had to be exaggerated, right? It's actually worse. It's worse than I remembered it. The DRM, the terrible multiplayer systems, they suck, but the worst thing is just how frustrating and unfun the single-player content is. There's like all these missions that feel like multiplayer skirmishes that you just have to play through to grind up progression to unlock new units, and it's just at a certain point, unless you've either grinded a lot or just played the campaign with someone else, it just becomes completely impossible to progress. It's just terrible. Like, it's hard, but it's also difficult to want to describe it as hard because they've clearly just made it into this awful grind. But, you know, few people actually even played it. I think its reputation preceded it when it happened, and thankfully, it was avoided by many. And number 8 is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. If you were a kid growing up with Harry Potter, you probably remember how surprisingly good those first couple of Harry Potter games were. You know, there's people that have a much more specific attachment to Harry Potter than I, but I did think that these games were a lot of fun to play. They had a lot of interesting places to explore, usually an excellent soundtrack to go along with the adventure too. Goblet of Fire, not so much. Even though it got decent reviews, it was a huge drop in quality compared to the previous entries of the franchise. Instead of being an action platformer like the previous games, Goblet of Fire was just a pared-down action game. There's no levels to explore, just corridors, arenas, and they're packed with the most annoying enemies you can imagine. There's NPC companions that might as well be useless. Combat's dull as dishwater. I mean, it's so much worse than the previous games, it's not even funny. And on top of that, the PC version is especially bad. It has keyboard-only controls. You don't even use the mouse. There's no options for changing the settings. It's just that. Here you go. Like, the first few Harry Potter games really seem like labors of love, but the fourth entry is, hey, EA came here and made some shovelware for you. Enjoy it. Oh, I can't enjoy it, but you did make it. That's true.
We can't cast at him!
Stay low! Carpe retractum! That's great!
And number 7 is Crackdown 2. Remember Crackdown 1? It was so much fun to play. You ran around the city, collected orbs, caused chaos. No, there wasn't a ton of depth. But hey, you know what a sequel could have given it? Depth. Yeah, that's not what Crackdown 2 did. I guess the best way to put it is Crackdown took out all the fun parts of the previous game. That's it. Like, it didn't replace them, unless you consider, like, swapping in nothing a replacement. I just want to call it a removal. Like, it's hard to imagine, really, what they could have been thinking when they were making this game. Instead of fighting 3 unique games who all have their own fun strongholds and bases to clear out, things that are, unique and fun and feel like reasons to keep going. Nah, you're fighting zombies. Zombies. I said it'd be nice if there were more depth, like, not just to the gameplay, but narratively speaking, to where, like, your enemies might have more detailed motives and histories and, no, zombies. It's zombies. Lots of zombies. One of the strengths of the original game was how much variety there was in enemy bases. That gave the city so much character, and now, zombie holes. An entire game, seriously, of going around and closing up zombie holes. Everything is worse in this game. Crackdown 2 is terrible. The gameplay loop is so boring. The graphics are garbage. The whole thing is terrible. Say what you want about Crackdown 3, but at least you're not spending half the game defending a circle. And number 6 is Mass Effect Andromeda. A lot has been said about this game, and almost all of it is valid. It got a critical beating at its release for, bugs and the faces. Do you remember the faces? I had bland open world gameplay, not so great mission design. They fixed the faces a little bit, but pretty much everything else, still all true about it, even the bugs. They fixed the faces before the bugs. They didn't really fix the faces. I mean, look at that. Anyway, it was supposed to be an exciting new direction for the Mass Effect series. You're a new character in a new galaxy, bravely going forth and finding a way for the humans to live in case everything goes bad. Out back in the old Mass Effect trilogy, there's new aliens, there's new conflicts to get involved with. The sky's the limit, but for a lot of reasons, it just doesn't work. Most of the story feels like a less interesting remix of the original games, like all the same kinds of conflicts, but less good. The companions also, all very dull. Gameplay loop of exploring planets and setting up colonies. It should have been interesting, but no. 90% of the quests are boring filler. When the story actually does kick in, it's forgettable. Who cares? For a game about the survival of humanity, it's surprisingly low stakes. I mean, the gameplay is in some ways actually an improvement over the original Mass Effect trilogy, but not in every way. Some of the overly complicated menus get in the way most of the time, and that sucks because there's some gameplay concepts that actually would have been great. But whenever I turn on the game to reevaluate, I end up just wanting to take a nap. And number 5 is Devil May Cry 2, and yeah, it sucks to say. When you're talking about video games, 2 types of sequels, ones that try to do the same but better, and the ones that try to innovate and be completely different. Sometimes it changes work, which, like Super Mario Bros. 2, which wasn't, completely a sequel. That's a weird story, but you know what I mean. And sometimes they don't, like Castlevania 2, and sometimes, neither of those scenarios is true, and it just seems like the developers didn't try. That's DMC 2, unfortunately. To say the game is worse than the original, it's an understatement. There's a lot of problems here, and probably the worst thing about DMC 2 is the combat. It feels sluggish, weak, and probably the most important aspect of it is that it's not fun. Compared to the original, it's just night and day. Like, the first game's combat is fast, responsive, impactful. It looks completely awesome. In DMC 2, it doesn't. It looks pathetic. And that's the beginning of the game's problems. Level design's boring, story is a bunch of nothing, Dante acts way too seriously for no reason whatsoever, and basically there's one weapon the entire game, and the bosses are terrible. Like, this is probably the worst aspect of it. The bosses are pathetic. At the time, you just devil trigger and then stand there and beat on them until they're dead. It's not good. It's amazing, too, because it was so utterly lifeless and boring, it almost killed the franchise, and every single game that came after it was so much better. Yes, I am including DMC. And number 4, Alone in the Dark from 2008, or AKA Alone in the Dark 5. Okay, so this is one of those franchises that's just seminal, and it cannot seem to catch a break. The original is an all-time classic, considered to be like the originator of the entire survival horror genre, but the reboot from 2008, not sure what to categorize that as. I guess a cinematic horror experience thing? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to know. Instead of being set in a moody Lovecraft-inspired mansion, game's set in New York City, where you play as an appropriately edgy Edward Carnby fighting off ghouls. Combat is some of the most janky I've ever seen, and it is supposedly a big-budget game. Kind of shocking when you find out that this was a big-budget game. You're like, are you sure? It is an awkward game to play. Weird controls that developers probably thought were unique, but they really come off sloppy. There's bugs, and when I say bugs, I don't mean like little bugs. Like, there is a exciting car chase in this game that becomes impossible to complete if certain things happen. Maybe that's why they made it possible to skip any part of the story whenever you want. The ability to go to any point in the story whenever is a good idea, but like everything else, the game execution is wanting. Now, I will say the fire effects were fairly impressive for their time, but puzzles in this game are just like pulling teeth. The game has nothing in common with the series' survival horror roots. The story's total nonsense. The gameplay is awkward at best. And as a curiosity, it's not unplayable, but it's a bad game. And number 3 is Dead Space 3. Now, Dead Space 3. First Dead Space was great. Depending on your taste, the second was arguably better. And then the third game is yikes, yikes, yikes. It's basically ruined because EA wanted the series to be more profitable, so in an attempt to bring in a wider audience, they killed the series for nearly a decade. Like, so many of the decisions are baffling. The custom weapon system, in theory, a fun idea, right? But in a survival horror game, didn't make a lot of sense. Ammo is now universal, so there's never a point where you're short on ammo, making ammo not a source of horror in any way, shape, or form. And since ammo is universal, why not build a gun that does everything you want it to do and then never have to use any other weapon? Also, the whole weapon customization system felt like a way to sneak in microtransactions. Because even though they serve basically no purpose at all, you want to drop a few bucks on a resource pack? I mean, you can. You're already swimming in supplies, but you can. All right. So the custom guns basically make enemy encounters a breeze. That whole concept suffers. The limb cutting mechanics completely neutered, and all you're doing is fighting boring swarms of forgettable foes. The co-op stuff is where the game works the best, but hey, that's just out of place feeling. It's another example of a series totally ruined by corporate greed, and it's one of the most disappointing sequels of all time. And number 2 is Battlefield 2042. EA dominating this list, huh? I don't want to call them a winner, but I guess in terms of this, they are that. Anyway, the Battlefield series seemed like it was on the upswing with the popular Battlefield 1, but that was followed up with the much less well-received Battlefield 5. With the next game, it made sense to take things in a new, exciting direction and get some eyes back on the franchise, so 2042? Ooh, no, that was the wrong move. It's different, yeah, to say the least. Now featuring gigantic maps with 128 simultaneous players, a new specialist system that completely replaces the class system, and oh yeah, a whole hell of a lot of bugs. The game was a mess at launch, and it's not a lot better now. Complaints about the game are pretty wide and pretty varied. People don't like the new specialist system. They were angry about the missing features from previous games. Most found the maps too big and annoying to get around in, and the player count was so big that many players felt they had no real meaningful impact on how a match went. Biggest issue with the game, however, outside all the bugs, and yeah, there were a lot of bugs, but the game wasn't that much fun. The whole portal system had some potential, but lack of interest killed that mode right from the start. Battlefield has had a lot of ups and downs over the years, but 2042 is rock bottom. And finally at number 1, and it's at number 1 for a reason, Duke Nukem Forever. So Duke Nukem 3D is one of the seminal FPS games right out there with Doom and Wolfenstein. It's probably one of the more iconic games of the 1990s. Hard to imagine now, but back when this game was first released, there was a lot of hype behind it. As the years that went by, the hype slowly became derision and then finally indifference. By the time Gearbox finally bought the rights and put the game out back in 2011, a lot of people couldn't even believe it was there. However, unfortunately, it was real. It wasn't fake. It wasn't imaginary. But yeah, imagine the most boring mid-2000s era shooter you can, and that was an era of the boring shooter. That's what Duke Nukem Forever is. It's a collection of game design elements that felt old-fashioned at release, and all the annoying parts of FPS games from that time were there. The weapon limits, the regenerating health, lots of empty hallways to mask loading screens, and brown. We could say an ugly brown filter over everything, but I don't even know if it's a filter. Is everything just brown? Did they take a virtual crayon and just make everything brown? Why is it so brown? Why is everything from that era so brown? I mean, it was to hide the fact that they couldn't do a lot of detail. And I guess sometimes it worked, but it didn't work in Duke Nukem Forever. Shooting never feels good. The game constantly stops everything to force you to do a terrible puzzle or minigame. And these levels are so linear, it's a big actual problem. Everything about the game feels just desperate. The one-liners are weak. The raunchy content is beyond pathetic. Like, I'm not against raunchy content, but desperate? It's desperate. Like, that's what it is. Also, there's a bunch of level gimmicks, and they're not good. They just make things feel more boring. Like, for a game as famously bad as Duke Nukem Forever, you'd think there'd be stuff to laugh at, but that's not really the case. It's just boring and bad. And that's all. I think we've put you through enough at this point, so leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.